Chapter 15, in which the dragons crown a new king, and Cimorene gets a new job. The walk to the Fort of Whispering Snakes took longer than Cimorene expected. The trees of the enchanted forest grew close together in many places, forcing the dragons to take a zigzag path instead of heading straight up the bank of the river. Warrug, who was in the lead, seemed to be deliberately setting a slow pace. The princess was sure he was hoping that a second shift of wizards would arrive at the blackberry clearing before the dragons at the ford could be warned. She had no idea what would happen then, but she doubted that it would be any good. The escort dragon was not interested in Cimorene's worries, however, and he refused to speed things up, so the group ambled on. As they approached the ford at last, they heard cheering ahead of them. Warrug flinched visibly, and Eleonora and the Stone Prince were startled out of their quiet conversation. "What's that?" Eleonora asked. "Sounds to me as if we have a new king," their escort informed them, with great satisfaction. "That means I can get you a lot off my hands right away. What a relief. I thought I was going to be stuck with you for hours." Eleanor looked faintly indignant at this unflattering opinion. Morwen was merely amused. Warrug's rig sagged momentarily, and then he seemed to pull himself back together, and he continued on, as confidently as ever. Cimorene's concern deepened. What if Warrug managed to convince the new king that they were all lying? They reached the edge of the cheering crowd of dragons. "Who did it?" the escort dragon asked. "Who's the new king?" "How should I know?" the other responded. "I can't see a thing from way out here." "You'll find out soon enough," the escort dragon informed all of them. Then he raised his voice and shouted, "Make way! Coming through! Prisoners for the king! Prisoners for the king! Make way!" The crowd of dragons parted reluctantly, and the escort dragon herded the group forward, still shouting. They made their way through the cheering dragons until they reached the edge of the river. "Stand away!" shouted someone in the crowd. "Stand away for the king!" The nearby dragons drew back, leaving Warrug, the escort dragon, and Cimorene and her friends standing by themselves on a trampled moss. As the dragons moved away, the princess caught sight of Kazul lying comfortably beside the river. "Kazul!" Cimorene cried, and ran forward. "Are you all right?" A molted dragon standing beside Kazul shifted and flicked his tail angrily at Cimorene. "You should say your majesty," with a warning scowl. "Don't be ridiculous, Rax. She's my princess." "I'm quite all right, Cimorene. What are you doing here?" "You're the new king of dragons?" Cimorene said in astonishment. "But when you left this morning, you could barely fly. How did you get Colin Stone all the way from here to the Vanishing Mountain?" "The stone apparently does more than merely pick out the right king. The minute I picked it up, I felt fine." "This is impossible," Warrug said. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" Kazul asked mildly. "He better not. He's the one who was cheating, with the help of Zeminar and the rest of the wizards." "Really?" Kazul said, in tones of great interest. "It's all nonsense," Warrug declared. "The girl's just trying to attract attention." "Really?" Kazul said again, and smiled, displaying all of her teeth. "Oh, come now, Kazul. Surely you won't take a mere princess's word over mine." "That depends entirely on what she says. Tell us about it, princess." So Cimorene told them. She brought the Stone Prince forward to explain that he had overheard the wizards and Warrug discussing in the banquet hall, and she made Eleonora tell everyone about melting wizards with wash water and lemon juice. She told about getting to the Fort of Whispering Snakes on the first feather and being unable to convince any of the dragons to listen to her. She told about going to Morwen's house to find out where the dragons were, and about using the last feather to get to the wizards and melt them. She described Zeminar's unexpected appearance and subsequent melting, and the way Morwen had broken the wizard's spell, and she finished with an account of Warrug's futile attack. "And then he landed," Cimorene waved in the direction of the escort dragon, "and decided to bring us all back here. And I think somebody ought to go back to that clearing where the blackberries are before the next batch of wizards arrives. I don't know what they'll do when they find out what's happening, but—" "Yes, I see," said Kazul. She turned to a pale green dragon beside her. "Take 5 or 6 of the younger dragons, the ones who have been talking about starting a wizard hunt, and go have a look at this blackberry clearing." "Yes, your majesty," said the pale dragon with a fierce grin. "Surely you don't believe this?" Warrug shouted. Kazul stared at Warrug without saying anything, and the dragons around the edge of the circle rattled their scales. Your majesty," he added hastily. "Why should I disbelieve it?" Kazul asked of him, still watching him. "The whole thing is preposterous. I could How could wizards do anything to affect Colin Stone, Your Majesty? Kazula looked at Cimorene. I'm sorry, Cimorene said, shaking her head. I know what the wizards were trying to do, but I don't have the slightest idea how they were doing it. I believe I can explain that, Your Majesty, Morin said, as she stepped forward, tossing and catching the wizard's black rock casually in her right hand. They were using this. I believe you'll find that it comes from the Caves of Fire and Night, from the King's Cave, in fact, where Colin Stone was found. And one of the properties of the Caves of Fire and Night is that you can use one piece to cast spells which affect similar pieces. Just the way that impossible book said, Cimorene exclaimed. De Montmorency? Yes, I suppose he is fairly impossible. It's sufficiently similar to Colin Stone that the wizards could have affected the stone through it? Certainly, Your Majesty, Morin told her. This is, Warrug began. Ridiculous, impossible, and unbelievable, Kazul said. You've said that already, but I haven't heard you say anything particularly convincing in support of that attitude. Oh, really, Your Majesty. Next you'll be saying I poisoned King Tokos. Doesn't seem likely, Kazul admitted, since Tokos was poisoned with dragon's bane, and dragons can't get anywhere near the stuff without feeling the effects. What if Zeminar made a dragon's bane-proof packet for him to carry it in? Cimorene said, thinking of the bag Antral had been carrying when she and Eleanor met him in the valley. Something that would melt when he dropped it in the king's coffee. I suppose it's possible, but there's no evidence at all that Zeminar did such thing. What would it have looked like? Eleonora asked suddenly. Would it have been something like a very large tea bag? Everyone turned to look at Eleonora. I think that would have worked quite well. Princess, why do you ask? Because Warreg had something like that with him when he went to see King Tokaz the night before the king was killed. I saw it. An angry muttering ran through the crowd of dragons. Lies, Warreg snarled. They're all lies. Are they? Kazul said coldly. I don't think so. You must have wanted to be king very badly indeed. Warreg darted a glance around the circle of dragons. What he saw did not appear to reassure him. No! Consorting with dragons, killing the king, and plotting to cheat in the trials with Colin Stone, Kazul said, as if Warreg had not spoken. Hardly proper behavior for a dragon. The crowd was muttering in agreement. Cimorene looked from Warreg to Kazul and back, and Warreg appeared to be terrified of something, but Cimorene could not tell what it was. He crouched and seemed to shrink away from Kazul, drawing his wings in close to make himself as small as possible. Cimorene blinked. It was remarkable how much smaller Warreg could make himself look. In fact, he's shrinking, Cimorene exclaimed. No! Warreg cried again, but it was much too late. He shrank faster and faster, his wings melting into ridges along his back and his claws retracting. He was barely as tall as Cimorene's shoulder, and then, with a sudden shiver, he collapsed in on himself. A small rain of scales pattered to the ground. A moment later, an extremely warty toad with angry red eyes crawled clumsily out of the center of the pile. Is that Warreg? Eleonora asked in an astonished tone. The toad turned and glared at her, and she stepped back a pace. The stone prince put a protective arm around Eleonora's shoulder and glared back at the toad. Behave, or I will step on you, the stone prince informed the little toad. Yes, it's Warreg, Kazul said. She sounded almost sad. That's what happens when a dragon stops acting like a dragon. The toad turned his glare in Kazul's direction, and then hopped off, and disappeared among the stones along the riverbank. Eleonora shuddered. Kazul studied her for a moment. You were Warrug's princess, weren't you? I'm sorry about all this, but it couldn't be helped. It won't take long to find you another dragon. I don't think you have to worry about finding her another dragon, Cimorene said. She'd been watching Eleonora and the stone prince, and an idea had occurred to her. What? Why not? Because the stone prince fought with Warreg, and Warreg certainly didn't win. Doesn't that mean he gets to rescue the princess? Well, I'm not sure the rules covers the situation at all, but it sounds reasonable enough, and under the circumstances I doubt that anyone will object. Unless, of course, she does. Oh, said Eleonora, and blushed a rosy red. No, I don't object at all. Are you sure? The stone prince said anxiously. you won't mind waiting a while to marry me. I mean, if you're willing to marry me. You needn't, if the idea doesn't appeal to you." "It appeals to me very much," Eleanor said, blushing redder than ever. "But why do you say that we have to wait?" The Stone Prince sighed. "I still have to find a king and do him a great service, and that's bound to take a while." "For a young man as intelligent as you seem to be, you're remarkably foolish," Morwen commented. "What on earth do you think you've just done?" An expression of astonishment spread across the prince's face. "You mean the king I was supposed to serve is the king of dragons?" "Exactly," Morwen told him. "And I doubt that you could do her a greater service than saving the throne from Warrug's plotting." "That settles it then," Kazul informed all of them. "Let's get the rest of the ceremonies finished and get back to the mountains. There's a great deal of work to be done." The dragons all bowed, and eddies of movement began in various sections of the crowd. Shortly, 2 dragons came forward carrying Colin Stone. It looked like a long black log, about 3 times as thick as Cimorene's waist, and twice as tall as she was. The dragons laid it in front of Kazul and backed away. Another dragon appeared, holding a large circlet made of iron, with 6 spikes poking upward at intervals around the rim. Kazul set her front feet on the black stone, and the dragon set the circlet on her head. The crowd of dragons began cheering again, and after a few moments, they began forming a line to congratulate their new king and present their coronation gifts. Other dragons set up large tubs of wine and platters of meat and cheese, which were quickly surrounded. In the middle of the presentations, the dragons Kazul had sent off to the blackberry clearing returned, and the king took a short break from accepting congratulations to hear what they had to say. "The wizards indeed showed up before we'd been there, more than 10 minutes, Your Majesty," said the pale green dragon who was the leader of the group. 6 of them, just like your princess said." "They weren't happy to see us," the youngest dragon said smugly. "I would think not," Kazul smiled. "What did you do with them?" "We chased 5 of them away," the pale dragon reported. "I don't think they'll be back either." 5? The pale dragon shot a glance at the youngest of the group, who licked his lips and looked even more smug than before, and said nothing. "Yes, Your Majesty." "I see. Well, that's more than enough evidence to confirm what Cimorene's told us," Kazul commented. She raised her voice. "The arrangement between the dragons and the Society of Wizards is hereby cancelled. From now on, wizards will not be allowed anywhere near the Cave of Fire and Night, no matter what they say." Then she went back to accepting presents and congratulations from her new subjects. Cimorene watched the festivities with mixed feelings. She was very glad that Kazul was the new king of dragons, but she couldn't help wondering what effect Kazul's coronation would have on her own position. The king of dragons certainly wouldn't need a princess as a mark of status, and there would be plenty of younger dragons eager to cook and clean for their king, if only as a way of getting a start at the court. Her preoccupation stayed with her for the rest of the day, through the entire coronation picnic and the flight back to the mountains of morning. Cimorene and Eleanor rode on the back of a very large dragon whose scales were such a dark green that they almost looked black. Eleanor would have preferred to ride with the Stone Prince, but none of the dragons were willing to take on a second passenger if the Stone Prince was the first. All the dragons had paid their respects to Kazul at the coronation, so the cave was empty when the dragon dropped her off. When the princess said goodbye to Eleanor, she promised to come over and help her pack the following morning. Then she went in and waited for Kazul to come home. The new king of dragons did not arrive until very late. She was still wearing the iron crown, and she looked very tired. "Thank goodness that's over," she said, taking the crown off and throwing it across the cave. It hit the wall and bounced off with a harsh clang. "You shouldn't treat your crown like that, Your Majesty," the princess told her, retrieving the iron circlet. "Of course I should," the king of dragons told her. "It's expected. That's why we made it out of iron instead of something soft and bendable. And don't start calling me Your Majesty. I've had enough of that for one day." Cimorene began to feel a little better. "What happens next? Tomorrow we start moving," the dragon told her and sighed. "It will probably take weeks. It's too bad there's no way of warning a new king in time to pack everything up before the work starts." "Everything?" Cimorene said in tones of dismay. "Even the library and the treasure vaults? But I only just got them organized." "Everything. And if you think straightening out things here was difficult, wait until you see the mess the official vaults are in." Oh dear, said Cimorene. Is it very bad? Kazul nodded. It's just, I've just come from looking at it. You'll see for yourself tomorrow. There's a smallish cave next to the library that I think will do nicely for you, but I'd like you to look at it before we start hauling things around. You mean you want me to stay? Cimorene blurted. But I thought the King of Dragons didn't need a princess. Don't be ridiculous, Kazul told her. How am I going to get my Cherries Jubilee if you don't stay? And you haven't even started cataloging the library. And how else am I going to get the king's treasure vaults arranged so I can find things? I'm not going to have time to do it. Won't the rest of the dragons object? Kazul snorted. I'm the king. One of the advantages of being king is that nobody objects to whims like keeping a princess when you're not supposed to need one. If it bothers you, we'll give you a different title. King's cook and librarian, maybe. Stop worrying and go to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day for the both of us. The princess smiled and went off to her rooms with a light heart. She slept soundly and was up early the next morning. The new king was already awake and supervising 3 of the younger dragons, who were packing up the treasure in the library. Since Cimorene was pressed into service at once, it was several hours before she could get away and keep her promise to Eleonora. I'm sorry I'm late, Cimorene apologized when she arrived at the cave at last. But it didn't occur to me that Kazul would be moving too, and she wanted me to help. Oh, it's all right, Eleonora assured her. It wasn't as big of a job as I expected, and the prince helped. I'm almost finished. She gestured at the almost full suitcase laying open on the floor. On the other side of the room, the stone prince was stacking the empty drawers from Eleonora's bureau. Well, at least I got here in time to say goodbye. You're staying with the dragons, then? The stone prince asked, straightening with a frown. Are you sure you want to do that? Of course she's sure, Eleonora told him. Kazul's going to need her even more than she did before, and Cimorene wouldn't be happy in a normal kingdom. How did you know that? She asked, staring at her. It's obvious. Linderwool is about as normal a kingdom as you can get. If you ran away from there, you certainly wouldn't be happy anywhere like it. I didn't mean that part, Cimorene said, reddening slightly. I meant about Kazul wanting me to stay. Oh, that was obvious, too. You're the only one who was worried about it. She studied Cimorene for a minute and shook her head. I wouldn't like being a princess for a king of dragons, but it will suit you down to the ground. I think it will, Cimorene said, smiling. Then maybe you can tell me something, the stone prince asked her. What's being done about the wizards? They've been banned from the Mountains of Mourning, and there are 100 or so dragons out checking to make sure they've gone. They haven't had much luck, I'm afraid. Most of the wizards left after the first few got eaten. That's all? Asked the prince. What else can the dragons do? The wizards didn't actually poison King Tokos. Warug did that. So there's no jurisdiction for an all-out attack on the headquarters of the Society of Wizards, even if all the dragons agreed that they wanted to do it. Which they don't. I suppose you're right. But you better tell Kazul to keep a close eye on them. Those wizards will make more trouble just as soon as they figured out a way to do it. I don't know about that. I think Zeminar was behind most of it, and you melted him. That's it, and Eleonora said and snapped her fingers. I almost forgot to tell you. Moira and I talked for a long time yesterday, and she says that melting a wizard isn't permanent. You mean they all come back? Eleonora nodded. It will take them a while, though, and Morin said for you to come and visit soon. She thinks that in a few days she'll have figured out a way of melting wizards without dumping soapy water over them. A method that's a little less sloppy, was the way she put it. That will be useful if the wizards start making trouble again, Cimorene said thoughtfully. Is this everything, Eleonora? The stone prince asked, gesturing at the suitcase. Yes, I think so. Eleonora pulled the top of the suitcase over, and the stone prince set one foot very gently in the middle of it and pushed until the latch clicked. Where are you going first? The princess asked. His kingdom or yours? Neither, Eleonora said, smiling. We're going to Morwen's. She said she can change it back from stone to normal. We asked Kazul last night if we could go out through the caves of fire and night, and she said yes. So, I don't know, Eleonora, the prince said. I'm beginning to get used to myself this way, and there are certain advantages. There are disadvantages, too, Eleonora said, blushing slightly. Cimorene began to giggle. Eleonora's blush deepened. How are you going to get rid of that chip in your sleeve if you can't change clothes? I I think I see what you're getting at, the Stone Prince replied, eyeing Eleanora meditatively. And you're quite right. There's no comparison. We had better see Morwen as quickly as possible. Eleanora and Cimorene looked at each other and burst into unstoppable giggles. The Stone Prince blinked at them. It's not funny, he said indigently, which only made them giggle harder. Shaking his head, he waited for them to stop, then picked up Eleanora's suitcase. Shall we go? Cimorene walked with them to the iron gate that led into the caves of fire and night. A purple dragon was waiting to guide them through the caves. Kazul was taking no chances on Eleanora and the Stone Prince getting lost. Cimorene hugged them both and wished them a safe journey. And I hope you both live happily ever after. I hope you do too, Eleanora called back as she and a Stone Prince followed the dragon through the gate. Cimorene watched until they were out of sight and then started back toward Kazul's cave. She thought about Morwen and the wizard-melting spell, and about Cimorene and Antral and the other wizards who would somehow be back soon. She thought about Kazul and about straightening out the treasure vaults that belonged to the King of Dragons, and about all the hundreds of books in the King's library, and of all the problems that the King of Dragons would have to deal with. She thought about Eleanor's last words and smiled. Happily ever after? She wasn't so sure about that, though she certainly was hoping to enjoy herself. She was positive, however, that life with the dragons would be interesting and busy, and in Cimorene's opinion, that would go a long way toward making her happy. Happily ever after? I don't think it's quite what you meant, Eleanora, she murmured to the empty tunnel. But one way or another, I rather think I will. The end.